Good morning, Internet, humans, and AI alike. My name's Keith, and I want to thank you for tuning in to the second video log out here in So Called Braintree. I'm sitting here in our cellar right now on the ancestral land of the Massachusetts Nation, which has been occupied since the early 1600s. I wanted to talk about a topic today that's near and dear to my heart, albeit extremely complicated and not something I pretend to understand, but something I think should be a more tangible part of the political discussion nonetheless. So I wanted to just put some ideas out there regarding infrastructure. Now, infrastructure is all of the interconnected systems that keep a culture's day-to-day existence running in a material sense, in a physical sense. So when people think of infrastructure, they often think of roads and bridges, pipes, sewers, the electric grid, the telecommunications grid, things like that. I think a lot of the times infrastructure is not really thought about, not talked about so much until it starts to break down, until it's not there, until you have to pay for it and it hurts your wallet. I think a lot of the discussion around infrastructure these days kind of falls into two camps. On the one side we have, public infrastructure is crumbling and it's a huge problem for people and businesses and, everyone from Flint, Michigan who has toxic lead water, coming into their homes to, that dam in California that almost didn't work right and took out the whole dam. So on that side we have a lack of investment, and then on the other side we have way too much investment in private fossil fuel infrastructure, pipelines and whatnot that are running roughshod over the rights of communities, over the rights of sovereign indigenous nations, and basically over the rights of beings on planet Earth to a livable, healthy planet to live on. While those are very important discussions, I want to expand, at least for myself, the scope of what infrastructure can be, what it can mean. So rather than looking at infrastructure as these kind of static, concrete, massive projects, I want to look at infrastructure as the cumulative set of systems and practices that a culture designs and implements to basically take care of the everyday basic necessities required to keep life going day after day, generation after generation. To me, infrastructure plays a kind of mystical role in a culture because it's these infrastructure systems, these life support systems, what they're doing is they're transforming the raw energy, the raw resources and materials of creation, of nature, the universe, whatever you want to call it. Infrastructure systems transform that raw energy into the building blocks that cultures use to reproduce themselves, basically, like I said, day after day, generation after generation. Because cultures from all over the history of the world have, created their own infrastructure in an infinite number of different ways. The infrastructure systems by which a culture is able to maintain its physical existence in the world, they obviously depend on the context within which the culture finds itself and the environment within which the culture is unfolding, but to a certain extent it reflects the underlying mythologies, the underlying belief systems that a culture has with regard to other humans, with regard to nature, and with regard to basically the purpose of life. But I think that the underlying mythologies of a culture, the beliefs, the values of that culture are reflected in the infrastructure systems that physically hold that culture up. So in the United States we have a predominantly capitalist culture, and I think a lot of our infrastructure is really geared towards the expansion of capitalism. But we'll get back to that a little bit later. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the, what I see as some basic domains of infrastructure. Now, this is a working concept, so I'm not saying this is the be-all, end-all of the infrastructure categories, but for me, they're a helpful way to think about different aspects of infrastructure that keep our everyday lives going. So, this is actually a necklace that I made out of flax that we grew in the backyard, which I spun into linen and then crocheted. And it's kind of like an infrastructure rosary, basically. So this right here is a little bundle of the flax from which this necklace was made, and this represents the raw materials from which all of our tools and houses and basically every other aspect of our physical culture is constructed from. So whether it be the iron coming from a mine, or clay coming from, a riverbank, or even the plastic being distilled from petroleum products, this represents the extraction, the gathering of resources from the earth. This next one here is kind of the other side of that. This represents all the waste and the trash systems, the recycling systems that cultures use to basically deal with or reincorporate the byproducts, the waste generated by the rest of the cultural activities. So whether it's CO2 going out the chimney behind me, or putting out the recycling bin, or putting all the food waste into the compost bin, that's what this represents, is what we do with our waste. This one right here is a little gear, and it kind of represents the means of production, manufacturing, basically all the processes and the labor by which those raw materials and other resources are transformed into the goods that we use in our everyday lives, or the goods that basically all the products that are manufactured, the processes that make that happen, are represented in this little gear. Here is a little quill tip of a pen, and this represents communication infrastructure and the way that humans and cultures are able to transmit ideas. So whether it's an oral history, or whether it's fiber optic cable, the internet, all that infrastructure, cultural infrastructure, is represented in this little pen communication. This right here is a shipping tag that I found at the port of Miami, which is my hometown. And what this represents are transportation systems, ways in which people are able to move around and to transport goods around. So whether it's a giant, mega tanker with tons and tons of goods being transported around the world, or a subway system, or even a sidewalk, the cumulative infrastructure that allows people and goods to move around, represented in this shipping tag. This little piece of anthracite coal represents energy. So this coal is, if you burned it, obviously a lot of energy would come out. It's actually solar energy that's been fossilized. That's why they call it fossil fuels. But so this doesn't only represent fossil fuel energy and electricity, it also represents the energy that you get from food, the energy that the wind carries with it that can be captured by a sail or a windmill, even the energy within a human or an animal. This represents that really dynamic kind of process on the planet that we call energy in all of its different forms. Right here is a little bullet that I found in a forest, and what this represents is basically the concept of self-defense and security. So whatever a culture needs to do to protect itself, whether it be from aggressive cultures nearby, or even from events in the natural world such as a fire or a flood, whatever those self-preservation mechanisms are. Maybe it's a smoke detector, maybe it's a wall, maybe it's a levee. Whatever it is that cultures do to protect themselves and to preserve their ability to continue in the world, that's what this bullet represents. This right here is a old rusty bent nail, which represents shelter, or the habitats within which culture unfolds. And so you have architecture, buildings, anything like that. Those kinds of structures are what this nail represents. The next one on the infrastructure rosary is this little bag of soil here, and what this represents is basically the territory upon which a culture unfolds. It doesn't have to just be one specific place. It could be changing from place to place. It could be even like water, lakes, rivers, oceans. Obviously, since the United States is a settler-colonial nation and basically built on the sovereign occupied territory of other nations, this is a pretty loaded one, as they all are really, but yeah, this represents territory or land. This next piece on the rosary is a little ear of corn that we grew, and it represents basically food, all the systems, the cultural systems by which food is created. And so this is, it doesn't have to just be food that's grown. It could be food that's caught from the oceans, gathered from the bays, or hunted in some form or another, and all the practices of, cleaning and cooking, preparing food, all of those rituals. That's what this symbolizes. This one right here is a little baby that came in a little cake from New Orleans, but basically this baby represents care. So, oftentimes care, labor, caregiving isn't really thought of infrastructure, but to me it is certainly an essential component of, being able to thrive and live a healthy life on this planet, and is a cultural necessity to care for not only children and those who need care, throughout their lives, but also for elders, and how we, how the cycle of life is accounted for in a culture's mythology and practices. This right here, this fuzzy little stick is, it was the leaf of a mullein plant, and this represents healthcare in a very basic way. Mullein is a pretty medicinal plant for a lot of different things. It's very helpful, but this also represents all of the cultural practices by which, the sick are taken care of, and basically health is promoted and kept up. So whether it be hospitals or different therapies or different practices that people use to keep themselves healthy and to get better, that's what this represents. Healthcare. And this is the last one. This is a little shell that I found again in Miami, and what it represents is basically all of the practices and infrastructure by which cultures can interact with and use water, which is obviously one of the most basic and important elements on the planet for humanity, not just for sanitation and drinking, but also for irrigating crops and for use in so many different processes of manufacturing and, putting out fires. There's so many important uses for water, so that's what this represents. So yeah, these are the 13 different aspects in this little rosary.